Good morning. Good morning. So, we have to take our story forward, and today an interesting set of topics to be done. We'll start with deindustrialization, then we have to go to drain of wealth, then go to famines, then we'll pivot to transportation, and thereafter education policy. I think this is what we'll be able to cover. And very simply, we should have or could have gone into constitutional history, but most probably tomorrow is going to be constitutional history. That this is the agenda for tomorrow, 1773, 1784, etc. This is for 21st, and we'll also start socio-religious reform. Tomorrow. No, tomorrow is for sure there is a class. We are not clear if 22nd is Eid or 23rd is Eid. That we'll get to know only on tomorrow only. So tomorrow though we have class for sure. There is no issue with regards to that. Now, one very important concept is that this theme, social justice reform, is again a little bit descriptive. So the first, maybe tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday, which is 3 of these days, we have a little bit descriptive modules. Last of the descriptive modules in the understanding of, for example, social justice reform, peasant and tribal. Like the expansion of British Raj, here it's only organization, this, that, then basic features, founder. So this module again is a little bit descriptive, which we'll talk about when we'll reach there. But as of right now, what we need to understand is that drain of wealth, famines and transportation plus education policy is the last of education and the concept of what we call as a consolidation of Raj. And then we'll start to go into social change and what we call as very simply, the way the British had now expanded into each and every zone of the Indian subcontinent. Now, yesterday what we discussed very simply were the land revenue settlements and commercialization of agriculture. Heavy topics, but if you basically remember, permanent settlement with the zamindar, 90% tax rate forever. Thereafter, Rayatwari with the Rayat, 50 to 60% can be changed anytime. And Mahalwari with the Mahal as a revenue unit, and that is 66% for 30 years. Thereafter, it can be changed. Thereafter, we saw how commercialization is a forced process in Indian history itself, and how forced commercialization in turn leads to our peasants adopting crops which the British also wanted. So we had very well established yesterday that land revenue settlement and commercialization are interlinked with each other, And when we talk about interlinkages itself, this interlinkage is leading to this process becoming forced. And now we come to deindustrialization, where it is equally important to understand how land revenue is linked to commercialization, is linked to deindustrialization. Now, when we talk about deindustrialization, this term refers to a very specific thing. This term refers to a very specific thing, wherein in the Indian context, deindustrialization term is a little bit problematic. How? Because when I say deindustrialization, it means the process of destruction of industries. The term itself means deindustrialization is destruction of industries. But the problem is that industrial destruction happens only when you are an industrialized country, where you have factories or where you have proper labor and workers. But in the Indian context, this term is not used for destruction of factories, but is used for the process of destruction of weavers and handloom sector. This is a very important point you need to understand, that in the Indian context, deindustrialization has a totally different connotation. So if we are clear of what is the vision for today and tomorrow, can we start? Because it's a very interesting topic and very well connected with all the things we've discussed till this point. Can we start? Come on. Okay. One more important thing, that what I am going to tell you with regards to deindustrialization, you will not find it in Bipin Chandra, you will not find it in Spectrum, you will not find it in any standard book you pick up. Because what I'm giving you is basically academic level understanding of deindustrialization. Because there was a very interesting book which was published maybe 5 years back, which is called How Europe Became Rich and Asia Poor. And the author Prasadan Parthasarathy gave a very interesting way of understanding deindustrialization. And that has now become a staple way of understanding deindustrialization. But it has not been used vis-a-vis this UPSC zone. But if you actually go with that explanation, you will automatically realize that everything actually makes sense vis-a-vis why is that we got deindustrialized and Europe did not. And more than that, why is that our weavers had a major advantage at one point of time and later they did not have it. So whatever we do right now is a little bit technical but extremely interesting and very well connected to other topics. So as I said, deindustrialization in Indian context refers to specific destruction of the handloom or the artisanal sector, specifically weavers. And why do we say destruction? That pre-1765, India was net exporter of finished cloth or cotton cloth, and by post 1813 India becomes a net importer of finished cotton cloth. So be very clear of what we mean by deindustrialization. Nagaraja, the police SME just pushed the police article link because it is there in the dashboard. That is true, but some people are not able to find it. Just pathway of that. Okay. Now, let's see why. Can we do this? Come on. Yes. Now, more or less everybody is still, I don't know why joining in, but I'll now start the story. Thank you, Famina. Okay. Famina has pushed the link. Okay. Now, please pay attention to the whole concept. Pre 1765, pre-1765, our weavers have three major advantages. Three major advantages. First being that they possess small amounts of land and they are part-time agriculturists, wherein in off season of agriculture they do weaving, and in agri season they are involved in subsistence farming. What do you mean by subsistence farming? What do you mean by subsistence farming? Weaver means Julaha, the people who weave. Subsistence farming means, yes, production for own consumption, not for the market, but own consumption. So whatever they produce, they eat. But basically, this is the first advantage they have. First advantage which they have, which is that they have additional income or livelihood. We will not say income, rather we will say additional resources to bank upon if something disrupted weaving. So the first advantage is that they are actually not fully weavers. Our weavers are at one point of time agriculturists, and at one point of time they are weavers. So their role is interchangeable, or in a way they are not purely anything. They're not purely weavers, they're not purely agriculturists. They are in between this system. So if something happens to agriculture, they can rely on weaving. If something happens to weaving, then they can rely on agriculture. And this is a very important point you need to understand, that this gives them a type of cushion. It gives them a type of cushion in both sectors. If something happens to agriculture, they have weaving. If something happens to weaving, they have agriculture. So I hope you can understand the first advantage which our weavers have pre 1765, before the grant of Diwani. Basically a backup. Okay, very good. Come on, you have to be more clear about this because it will become more and more complex. So we understand the concept of backup. Very good. Now, the second advantage which our weavers have, which made their cloth cheap and had comparative edge over any other producer, was related to. So first advantage is that they are not fully agriculturists. They are not fully weavers. They are part-time agriculturists related to weaving and weavers related to agriculture. they have one additional backup and they can rely on agri income in that regard or agri resources in that regard. Now, the second advantage is much more significant if you look at it in the larger context. And that is because on the concept that though they have very, what we call as very less nominal income, but their real income is extremely high. Have you done the concept of real and nominal? If you have you done economics? No. No, yes, no. See, I understand this. No issues. I get it. Listen to me. Don't start to write GDP deflator and all. Listen. I give you 1 lakh salary and I myself get 50,000. Who has a larger income? You or me? Meaning you. 1 lakh. Rather, A has more, B has less. Now, A lives in Delhi. Rent is 50,000. Food is 20,000. And miscellaneous expenses 10,000. So, this person savings would be how much? 20,000. Now, I live in, for example, Pakistan. No, Pakistan inflation too much. I live in Bhutan. Rent is 2,000. Food is 1,000. Miscellaneous is 500 rupees. So my savings is how much? 46,500. Now, this is called the concept of nominal and real income. Nominally, who has more income? A. Because he gets 1 lakh and B gets 50,000. But in real terms, who has more income? B. Because in real terms, the income of B is extremely high because where they are staying, the cost of living is extremely low. So therefore, savings is extremely high. So never go by nominal income. Never go by nominal income. Real income, the purchasing power is a totally different concept to real income. But think of it that basically, nominally an income can be very, very high. But in real terms, that income could be very low. I'll give you a very simple example of this. An IAS officer's salary, starting salary is 1,10,000. An equivalent corporate, maybe for example, you go to TCS. The equivalent rank of a TCS officer may be 5 lakhs. But though nominally it seems that the TCS person has more income, the real income of IAS officers is much higher because it is based on the car which you get, Tata Consultancy Service. The car which you get, the house which you get at a very, very, very low rate, very low rent for no car rent, but house rent is very low. You get CGHS, you get certain benefits. So because the benefits are actually quite high in an IAS job, not allowances, but benefits. Allowances are still low only. I'm adding the allowances to write 1,10,000. The benefits are the real income of that person. So maybe if I say it in real terms, this is 6 lakh rupees. So what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to argue here is that maybe I earn more in the sense of nominal income, but real income is very, very important, because that tells you how much purchasing power you have, or actually how much real savings you have. So do you understand the concept of nominal and the concept of real? Yes? Anybody who said no, now you understand it? And I'm not making that number up. The starting salary is 1,10,000 only. This is pre-tax. After tax, less than that. Okay. Now, our viewers have this major advantage that their nominal income is very less, but their real income is extremely high. So, for example, a weaver in England could earn £100 a month, and our weavers in India could earn only rupees 50 a month. But though nominally there's a difference, in real terms, we had an advantage. And that advantage, the reason is called grain wage. Now, please pay attention. Totally new concept to you. It's called the concept of grain wage. Grain wage is high. What do I mean by grain wage high? 1 unit of grain was extremely cheap vis-a-vis England. Vis-a-vis England. So the concept of grain wage is very simple. The concept of grain wage is very, very simple. That no, it's not in terms of getting it from yourself. It's just that grains were sold in India, for example, 10 paisa for 1 kg, and in this is in India, and in England, grain means anything, rice, anything, rice, wheat, anything. That does not matter. Vis-a-vis means in comparison to. So India, it is 10 paisa per kg, and maybe in England, it is £1 per kg. Now, though our farmer is earning rupees 50, how many kgs can he buy? How many kgs can he buy out of all this 50 rupees? How many kgs can he buy? 500 kgs. And here he can only buy out of $100 100 kgs. So now are you getting the fact that though his income is extremely low, in real terms his income is 5 times more than the Englishman or an English weaver. His grain wage is extremely high. Grain wage is extremely high. 5 times that of the Englishman. So what advantage the Indian weaver had was that because grain wage was high, real income was also high. Are you able to follow this concept? That our weavers have two basic. Grain wage, as I told you, is how much money you need for buying 1 unit of grain. I'll write the definition. Grain wage is how much money is needed to buy 1 unit of grains. Let's take it as 1 kg. So please try to understand. I'm trying to bring these two concepts together. Pre 1765, weaver has two advantages. The first advantage is that he is also part of agriculture. So he produces additional resources. And second is, this is a weaver in Bengal, anywhere in India. And second is that their real income based on grain wage was really high. And the reason for that is very cheap grains, or what we call as price of grains is very less. That gives them an extreme advantage, because India, as it is at this point of time, is an agrarian country and agriculture is healthy. If you can actually understand this concept, you automatically understand what is going to change. Do we understand the two major advantages which the weaver has, and why he is able to sell? He can sell cloth at a very cheap rate, and that is because of these two advantages. Everybody has to say yes or no. I need to know that you're understanding it. If you understand it, then only I tell you how deindustrialization will happen. We understand that there are two basic advantages which they have, which is additional income from agriculture, and real income is extremely high because the grains are very cheap. Therefore, their grain income is very, very high in that regard. Right? Okay. So we all understand it perfectly. Great. Now what happens? Now, post 1765 to 1813 to 1833, now the British, Deepak, if you said no, you need to tell me what is the aspect which did not make sense. The aspect, two simple concepts. They have agricultural labor, they have agricultural income, and second, the fact related to the aspect related to how they have a grain wage which is high because of cheap, what we call as grains, and therefore they can easily understand it. In the last concept is grains are cheap, so they can buy in their very low salary or low income very, very high quantities of grains. So they see for everybody, how do you decide price? You decide price by adding your own expenses, right? If I want to sell this at 100 rupees, this stylus at 100 rupees, it should cost me only 50 rupees. Input cost should be 50 rupees. So I am producing it for 50 rupees and having a 50 rupee margin. If my income, grains are very, very cheap, I can sell it at 1 rupee only because my grains are coming for 10 paisa. And a European weaver cannot do that because his grains are expensive. So because the factor cost or the input cost is very, very less in India, The weaver can sell cloth which goes at a rate which the Europeans cannot produce only. So there's a competitive edge which our weavers have because of the fact that they are able to buy more grains at much less salary because grain prices are extremely low. So grain wage, as I said, is how much money is needed to buy 1 unit of grain. The simple point is that their input cost is less. In India, the input cost is less, so the price of cloth is less. Now, is this making sense? Come on. For anybody who was not able to understand it, because the input cost is less, therefore, the price is less. Grain wage is high when, yes, grain wage is high, there's an inverse relationship, right? When your grain wage is going to be high, when your price of grain is going to be low. If your price of grain is very, very high, then your grain wage is low. It's an inverse relationship that if I can buy more, it's a higher grain wage, right? So I presume now everybody understands what it is. Deepak, come on. The basic point of the matter is that it's a very logical way of understanding it, and we have never seen such a beautiful understanding of deindustrialization. People talk about industrial revolution straight. I will tell you the reality with regards to that, because people tend to argue that deindustrialization was because of directly related to industrial revolution. Industrial revolution was not the cause but an effect, or there's a relationship where there's a delay. So we need to understand how that change does not actually come from England but from India. There will be a problem with regards to industrial revolution, but that is not a cause but an effect or a subsidiary cause. Can I now go into how deindustrialization will begin in India and how our weavers will become extremely dependent on the British through what is called the Dadani system? Okay, very good. Now let's talk about the weaver and his first advantage. First advantage is based on the fact that he has agriculture as backup and additional resources. Now come the British and they introduce land revenue settlements. Land revenue settlement is going to destroy the agricultural sector, specifically the peasant. Peasant will become landless through it. Now, if a full-time agriculturalist is struggling, would a part-time agriculturalist actually survive? No. So what happens is that the weavers, through the land revenue settlement, are ejected out of agricultural sector as they cannot meet the revenue demand and they lose their land. So very simply, they lose their land and the first advantage is gone. First advantage is gone. Wherein weaver cannot do agriculture as settlements change the dynamic. Take a very simple example. Vanshika, take a very simple example. That I am a weaver, I was doing part-time agriculture. Now, the British come and say permanent settlement. Permanent settlement means that as soon as permanent settlement will happen, weavers' right to the land, will it be retained or will it be taken away? It will be taken away. So if it will be taken away, in one go itself, the weaver now has become a landless labor. So whatever subsistence agriculture I was able to do, now I can't do that. The first advantage was based on the fact that land revenue settlements were not there, so the weaver could rely on agriculture. If there was any issue, there was a backup. However, because there is the land revenue settlements, we have discussed this yesterday itself. What is the basic impact of land revenue settlement? The basic impact of land revenue settlement is the fact that it is based on extremely high revenue demand. So if I am not a serious agriculturalist, I will obviously not survive. So please understand this. UPSC changes the pattern. You are not a serious aspirant. Will you survive the examination? No. You need to be a serious aspirant, and serious aspirants itself are actually struggling. So will a part-time weaver or part-time non-serious aspirant actually survive? Weavers are not fully agriculturists. They are part-time agriculturists. So the first advantage was based on the concept. I told you that everything is related to each other. This link nobody talks about. Weavers will one random day not wake up and be in a disadvantage. It has been systematically taken away from them. That systematic taking away process is that land revenue settlements fundamentally change agriculture. And when they fundamentally change agriculture, the weaver loses his first most important advantage, his backup, his plan B, or whatever you want to call it. And now he has to solely rely on his weaving. Then that is the basic point you need to understand. He now solely relies on weaving. Is this making sense? How do land revenue settlements take away the first advantage? Please, you need to tell me this, that is it making sense? Because then I move to second one. First advantage is gone. Okay. Now, let's talk about the second advantage. Land revenue settlements lead to forced commercialization. Forced commercialization means that people will move from grains to cash crops. So what is going to happen to the price of grains? It will start to rise, it will increase. If price of grains increase, what happens to grain income? Fall in grain wage. As I told you, inverse relationship. If price of grain is going to rise, fall in grain wage. Now, fall in grain wage would mean real income will start to decline. And when real income is going to start to decline, comparative edge will be gone. And now comes the biggest challenge which they faced, with which they faced. Industrial Revolution now starts to produce extremely cheap machine made cloth. And if the machine made cloth is extremely cheap, weaver cannot compete and has no other option but to give up profession. And this is what we call as deindustrialization, wherein our weavers actually become nothing but landless agri labor. Abhay, if grain supply falls and demand is the same, what happens to price? Rise. Didn't you do economics before you started with me? No? No issues? Maybe you'll do it later. Some of you have done it, some of you have not done it. Okay. Now, simple. First, you tell me, did this make sense? If it made sense, I'll bring both these things together in one slide. Yes, it did. See, people tend to argue that this is the sole reason. But is this the sole reason that the concept of industrial revolution will come and it will take away everything? No. There's a much intricate process which is there, and I'm again going to summarize it and then we'll move on. So, one second, let me summarize it. See how deindustrialization happens. How deindustrialization happens. Land revenue commercialization of agriculture, both linked together, produce the cumulative concept of deindustrialization. This takes away the additional income of the weaver or additional resources, backup gone. This will increase the grain prices as grain supply falls, grain wage increases, and comparative edge is gone. Add to this recipe industrial revolution equals to deindustrialization, which is destruction of handloom sector. Weaver is reduced to landless agri labor or secondary labor in company market. I'll discuss with you what is the secondary labor concept. Grain wage, yes, decreases. Okay. Grain wage decreases. Grain wage decreases. Now does it make sense? Industrial revolution, raw material was exported from India, finished goods came from foreign countries. That is also not true. That is also actually not true. If you understand this, if you actually understand this, it will be like a eye-opening moment. Because we tend to think of these three things as separate to each other. But actually, each of them are related to each other. If there was no land revenue settlement, there would be no commercialization. If there is no land revenue settlement and commercialization, there is no deindustrialization. Because there's a major myth with regards to the industrial revolution, I will tell you. But how grain wage will decrease? Because when grain prices increase, you can buy less of grains in the same amount of money. So grain wage decreases. I told you there's an inverse relationship between this. The simple point of the matter is that Indian weavers had a advantage. There are two advantages. Now, please understand. Again, repeating. Third repetition. After this, I don't repeat. The simple point is they have the first advantage, which is they are not purely weavers. They are part of both agricultural sector and weaving sector. So they are able to get additional income out of or additional resources out of agriculture. Second advantage is actually much more intricate, which is that their nominal income may be less vis-a-vis anybody else in the world, but their real income is high because of the wage or the grain wage being very, very high. What is then grain wage? Grain wage is the total amount of money you need to buy 1 unit of grains, be it rice, wheat, whatever. And because input costs dictate how much price is going to be there, input cost is really less because grain wage is extremely high. Grain wage has an inverse relationship with the price of grains itself. And therefore, as soon as grain wage becomes extremely high, the advantage becomes extremely pivotal towards the Indian weaver. This is what we enjoyed for centuries. For centuries, we actually enjoyed this. However, as soon as the British comes, there is a major change. First, land revenue settlements are going to take away the first advantage which they have, which is a backup plan vis-a-vis agriculture. And the second advantage which was there is taken away because commercialization will increase the cash price of grains. If price of grains will go up, fall in grain wage will in turn lead to their major competitive advantage gone, and the industrial revolution will therefore add to this and create destruction of the handloom sector, or what we call as deindustrialization. Are we clear? This is the whole concept. It is this argument you will not find anywhere because there's no concept of grain wage which you will see anywhere else. So this explanation itself gives you a comparative edge vis-a-vis any other candidate which is not taught by me, because no one else is talking about this. So very simply, understand this. Land revenue, commercialization, deindustrialization are actually related to each other. Now, one myth which I need to break before I go to what is called Dadni system and train of wealth. One myth which I need to explain to you very simply, is that people tend to argue that we feeded the industrial revolution. We feeded the industrial revolution. Shashi Tharoor pushes it, but technically more nuanced way, but there's a gap. See, people tend to argue that we funded the industrial revolution. We were the reason why the industrial revolution happened. And if India was not there, industrial revolution would not get the raw material. This is what you know. This is what you know. That go to any basic website, they will say that India's role in the industrial revolution was providing raw material. This is a generic argument which is there. However, this argument is incorrect. The role of India initially is not to provide raw material. The Industrial Revolution would have happened in England, and as I will show you when we'll discuss world history, would have happened in England irrespective of India. But India gave a major push not because of raw material, but because of market. I have the capacity to produce 1 lakh tons of cloth. But if nobody wants to buy that 1 lakh ton, what will I do? India was a vast market which they could first exploit, and once the market was harnessed, they changed our trade profile to get the raw material. Raw material, however, still, as I said, Indian cotton was never used in Manchester or in Lancashire. Indian cotton was just used to export it to the rest of the world. The whole industrial complex of England was actually fed by the American cotton. So we were not feeding the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was feeding us, or trying to push cheap cloth into the Indian market. So the role of India is dual. First the market, then the raw material. It's not the other way around. And when we'll talk about Industrial Revolution, when you discuss world history with me, I will discuss this concept with you. That the Industrial Revolution does not randomly happen. It has a very intricate story to it. Very simply, India's role, if you don't understand it, no issue. We'll discuss it again in world history. India's role in the Industrial Revolution of England is not as a supplier, but is as a market. And then later stages, it will become in 1864, 5 years a supplier, and then again a market. India was the access to market. If I have a capacity to produce a lot, I will only produce it if there are markets. So we were not the supplier. That's what a good way of saying, Chaitanya, that we are a consumer. We consumed the Industrial Revolution product, not supplied it. As much as it seems unreal, it is true. Because we tend to be taught like this, that we took it from here and we gave it to the English. Nobody is denying that there is no looting. But the relationship is much more intricate and subtle than actually what we understand. Getting my point? In terms of indigo and all, that's a separate issue altogether. Indigo is a commodity which was taken again as a dyeing agent in the Industrial Revolution. No issues at all. We are talking about raw cotton here. Raw cotton and cotton cloth. Right? So, can I now discuss Dadni and close this topic? Okay. Now, see, what is Industrial Revolution? What is deindustrialization? Process of continued and marked decline in traditional industries. A decrease in the proportion of national income generated by industries and percentage population dependent on it. However, in India, it only means destruction of Indian craft industry. Now, the British, as much as what they did, and they generally did, there are other 4 processes which also contributed to it. Weavers were reduced to the status of what we call as indentured labor by the company. This I will explain to you what it means. Then there was increased consolidated duty on Indian silk and printed calicos into Britain. So they also put more duty on our cloth. There was also the concept of free trade, but free trade was only forced on Indians and not on the English. And the Industrial Revolution also flooded the Indian markets with very cheap cloth, with very, very cheap cloth. So this is the most important concept you need to understand, is that now that they never encouraged modernization or growth of industries. They always had a discriminatory policy vis-a-vis tariff, wherein our cloth was always taxed more in England and less, and their cloth was not taxed only. And we have no capital goods industry, meaning that we don't produce anything, meaning each and every nut, bolt, iron, anything which was put in into the railways in India or even in any building was brought from England. Nothing was produced here. And the Indian industries were fully dependent on British industries for capital goods. Capital goods means any infrastructural good we don't have only in India. Now, how do the British actually make the weavers a slave to them? So a weaver now has two options. Weaver now has two options. First, after deindustrialization, he can go back to agricultural sector and become a landless labor. Or he can get employed by the English under what is called the Dadni system. Under what is called the Dadni system. But now what is Dadni system? See, Dadni was quite common in West Bengal and Bengal sector itself, wherein a dalal, what we call as technically an intermediary, agents, would go to a weaver and give them an advance. Okay, you don't have money, you take money, and you produce for us cotton spindles. Spindles mean that basically that you've seen dhaga, you've ever seen when you bought sui dhaga, that whole roll of thread you see, that roll of thread you see. So that roll of thread actually is what was their role. They said, you take money from us, we'll give you the raw material also. Your job is just to make the thread. And you will sell this thread to us at an extremely cheap rate. So if you understand the indigo system, Rayati system, think of it like Rayati, wherein the only role our weavers have is that merchants give advances to the weaver via the dalals and the stockbrokers and local stockists, and they will basically get a certain commission within the Dadni system, and the dalal would thereafter go to a weaver, give him the task of producing the yarn at a fixed price. So our weavers who had fed the international market for centuries, their only task was they get advance, they take it and buy raw material, and then they make thread and sell it to the British at a extremely cheap rate. I understand the concept of Dadni. Dadni is basically a type of slavery within the East India Company. That you take the advance, you buy raw material, then you sell it. Then you take the advance, buy raw material and sell it. Take advance, buy raw material and sell it. That is the only thing which the weaver has. From making cotton cloth, he's now just making thread. And that thread will, as it is, go to England. Done? Can I now safely say that you understand deindustrialization of India? Okay. Now, to just give you a tangible concept, how did we see it come up in our population data? The number of people who were dependent on agriculture between 1901 and 1941 increased from 63% to 70%. This 7% increase, who are these 7%? Who are these 7%? The weavers. 7% population which was got added to the agriculture sector are the weavers. Self-sufficient village economy destroyed, rural disguised unemployment and underemployment. Now, what do you mean by underemployment and disguised unemployment or overemployment? Underemployment is easy. You need 5 labor, but only 1 labor is working. Overemployment and disguised unemployment is the opposite of it. You would have seen in India that there's a hole to be dug. So they have to dig a hole. Needs 1 labor, but 5 will be standing. 1 will shovel, the other one will take it, then the third one will throw it, then the fourth one will bring it back, and the fifth one will then again dig it. This is called disguised unemployment. Basically, there is job for only 1 person, but there is 5 people doing the same job. 5 people doing the same job. So in India, disguised unemployment and underemployment both go together. Certain places 1 man is doing everything, and certain places 5 people are doing the same thing. So before I end this topic, just to repeat what is Dadani. Dadani is the concept of the company giving via dalals advances to weavers to buy raw material because the weavers have no income, and the weavers use that raw material to produce cheap yarn at a fixed rate, which is given back to the dalal. The dalal gives it to the British, and this cycle continues forever. Right? Clear, everybody? Can I now go to drain of wealth? We've been doing it for now exactly 1 hour. And I hope that the basic understanding is totally clear now. And one very, very important suggestion to all of you, you may have friends, you should have friends. Please don't share this concept of deindustrialization with them. Because this is your comparative advantage, your grain wage. Because everybody writes a certain type of answer. This answer only you will write if you've come, if I've interacted with you. So remember that. Right? Okay. If you have no friends, even better. Nothing better for a UPSC aspirant to have no friends. Okay. Now, we've discussed land revenue. We've discussed the concept of commercialization. We've discussed the concept of deindustrialization. Now we discuss a very standard concept. Very standard concept. The concept of drain of wealth. Now see, but sir, knowledge shared by increase. Knowledge increased by sharing. Very good. Give it. So they will become IAS officers by your knowledge, if that is acceptable to you. If charity is what you want to do, great, perfect. I can't stop you from doing that. Knowledge increased by sharing. Very good. So give your notes to your friends. Why not? The love will increase. Okay. Now, it's an examination. Everybody is competing with everybody. Once you clear this examination, make friends which help you. Okay. Now, let's talk about drain of wealth. See, I will be talking about drain of wealth twice with you. One in the context of Dadabhai Naoroji, which is called economic nationalism. On the other hand, here we are purely talking about economic impact or literally drain of wealth. Now, why am I doing drain of wealth here? Because it seems logical. How? I've discussed with you land revenue. I've discussed with you commercialization. And now I've discussed with you deindustrialization. All of these concepts are intricately linked to the larger motive of the British. The larger motive of the British, which was to economically exploit India. That is why they are here. They're not here to do anything good. They are here to exploit. Now, we need to understand the multiple channels of drain. Now, I think we have successfully established one thing, that nobody literally took out the money from the treasury of our princes and kings, put it onto a ship and took it to London. It was literally not a looting. It's not a literal loot. That it's like a money heist movie, or it's like a what we call as dacoity, that they came, they went to Farrukhsiyar, they opened his treasury, took all the gold, and they took it with them to England. That is not how the drain happened. As much as certain channels, rather not certain channels, but certain sources or certain what we call as popular imagination would argue, it is much more intricate than what we think of it as. Much more intricate. So let's try to understand the channels. How did the drain happen? Now please pay attention, everything is written in the PPT, but let's try to understand it in a much more nuanced way. The first channel is commodities. Commodities. Drain means, how do I say drain? Drain means drain, to go down. Now, the first channel is commodities. Commodities were used to fund both English interest in India and China. So it is literally the commodity. It is literally the commodity that they took these commodities and exchanged it for wealth. So opium, silk, cotton, the literal product itself is a drain, because every ton of cotton which went out of India would have been sold by a Britisher in the world market, but the income of that cotton was not given to an Indian but was given to a Britisher. So every commodity which they produced, we produced, and whatever they took from opium which was taken to China to get gold and silver, that was our income. That was our income. And that is why the second concept is export income out of trading in commodities. The problem is that every ship, merchant and trader is Britisher. So if we are trading in hundreds of crores, who gets that income? A Britisher. Because the trade itself is controlled by the Britishers. So the Britisher is the exporter, the Britisher is the importer, the Britisher is the intermediary, the Britisher is the ship owner, the Britisher is the labor. Everything is British. So the first two channels are the literal process of forced commercialization and the trade in commodities. Every commodity which went out of India was a part of the drain. People don't count it, but that is drain. Because the income which came from that commodity was never transferred to an Indian. Yes or no? First 2 points make sense. Come on. It will become a little bit more complex as we go on. Okay. So, first point is very simple. How did the drain happen? This is the question we're discussing. How did the drain happen? The drain happened not in literal money, but in commodities. Try to understand it in this way. The drain was not in the form of money, but it was in the form of commodities. Today, if India trades with Africa in grains or, for example, in cotton, and 100 crores is the level of trade, out of that 100 crores, something is going to an Indian farmer, something an Indian exporter is getting, something an Indian ship owner is getting, something that captain is getting who is an Indian. Everybody who's involved in that supply chain is an Indian. Therefore, the income which is generated is Indian. However, here, every step of the way, the supply chain is controlled by the Britisher. So, money was not money. Commodities were money. Are you getting this point? That the literal commodity itself is drain, and the export income out of that is also drain. Now, is this making sense? If somebody comes to you and say, British looted us, you will say yes. Then they will say how? You will say in commodities. They literally did not take money. They even converted the revenue in India into commodities, right? What was the concept? That after post 1765, Bengal income was converted into commodities and then taken to England. First, a commodity which they could sell in China. Second, a commodity which they could sell in England. So, trade is the money factor here, and money generated in trade is going to the English, and the commodity itself should have given something to our farmer. That also is not happening. Are we clear with regards to the first two? Why am I saying first and second point are not the same? First point means your currency of drain is commodities. Second point says the supply chain is English dominated. So supply based income is also going to the English. They're not the same thing. Money is sold for, yes, commodities is sold for money. British took commodities and sold it in international market. Come on, everybody, you have to tell me yes. Then I go to the other channels. Okay. Now, the next set is very interesting. Illegal transfers by company officers, bribes, so-called gifts, Bengal looting. This was literally money. This was literally money. Wherein the 53 lakhs rupees taken, the money which Clive took from Mir Jafar or Mir Qasim. Here, the illegal transfer by company officers of bribes, gifts, and Bengal looting was again Indian money. But again, Indian money. So from 3 crore from Tipu Sultan to what they get in Carnatic, to what they get in Marathas, to wherever they get it, they are remitting in commodities, but they're also remitting in money. But Clive was much more smart. What he used to do was, he used to convert the gift into commodities. He used to convert the gift into commodities. For example, he got 53 crores, 53 lakhs. He will not take it in 53 lakhs. He'll buy 53 lakhs worth of pepper and then sell it at 2 crore. Are you getting this point, that how commodities are actually the currency of looting? The looting is not happening in literal money. It is happening in commodities, because commodities can be sold 3 to 4 times at a much bigger rate in Europe. So how money launderers change the money, same way the commodities are like the currency of looting. So you understand the third point, that it is illegal transfer. It is illegal transfer. Whatever they got, they sell it. Now, the fourth is very near and dear to us. Indians were treated as second-class citizens. Not even second class. Lower than that. Okay. Can I move to the fourth point? Commodities, export income, illegal. Yes? Okay. Fourth point is dividend, interests, and a return on investment in India to shareholders. Now, if the East India Company gave their shareholders £100 worth of dividend, where is that £100 coming from? India. If the British say that you invest in railways, 100 rupees, and we will give you 105 back, 5% interest we will give. That guaranteed 5% interest, where is that rupees 5 coming from? India. If I have given a loan to a ruler in India and he gives me principal amount and interest, where does that interest come from? India. So in a way, this is called fiscal looting. Any form of interest, dividend, return, anything which you give is basically Indian income. So we understand this also, that if a British citizen gains from the East India Company, that is money taken out of an Indian pocket and put into a Britisher's pocket. Okay, very good. Now comes the most brutal of all. It's called home charges. Home charges. Now tell me one thing. If Lord Cornwallis was working in India and he was getting a salary of 500 pounds, who gave that salary? We the people. Okay. If Clive went back and got a pension of 100 pounds, who gave that money? We the people. Very good. Home charges is the biggest irony of drain. How? We literally paid for our own exploitation. We were exploited, we were looted, we were dominated, we were humiliated, we were killed, but we paid for it. We paid for every officer of the East India Company. We paid for every officer of the ICS. We paid for every revenue officer. We paid for every police officer. We paid for every salary, pension. We even at one point of time were paying the salary of the Secretary of State who was sitting in England. We literally paid for, it's not even subsidiary alliance. We literally paid for everything. Indian civil services. We literally paid for everything. Not through taxes. If the British is looting revenue and giving it to a British officer, isn't that a loot? Isn't that a drain? Understand this. If Government of India gives you 1,10,000 salary, you will consume that 1,10,000 salary by commodities in India, right? You will not go to Dubai and then buy everything there and then come back. So the income which is generated in India is consumed also in India. So you are buying in India. So therefore, the national income starts to increase. Here, we gave that money to Cornwallis to colonize us. And thereafter, no, fourth and fifth point is not the same. Fourth point is on fiscal investments. Fifth point is basically the administrative cost. Understand this. The administrative cost of ruling India was paid by India. How we gave? It's not that we said take this money. And understand, it's a very simple concept. 1 lakh rupees generated out of Bengal, out of which they pay 50,000 as salary to the different officers. Isn't that our money going to a Britisher who will send it to his family in England? Administrative machinery of the British is a British oriented, right? The district collector is Britisher. The people who are involved are Britishers. If I pay to a Britisher to rule me and he sends it to his family in England, which income will it be added to? Indian income or British income? British income. So isn't this a form of drain? 40% was the, at one point of time, 40% of all drain was home charges. 40%. And if I add to it the sixth point, which is called store purchases, every stationery equipment was imported from England. Pencil, rubber, scale, compass, uniform, helmet, paper, clip was imported from England. Nothing was produced in India. Nothing was produced in India. So if a Britisher needed a pen, that pen came from England. Who produces that pen in England? An English, what is called English company. So the English company canes, they are not buying Indian pens. Every uniform which an Indian soldier wore, that uniform was not made in India but was actually made in England. If you've ever been to, for example, Elphinstone College, if you've ever been to Victoria Terminus in Mumbai, there are big iron girders, very big iron beams which are put in, meaning close to 1 lakh tons of iron was used just in the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus in that regard. But not even 1 ton was made in India. Every ounce of iron came from the English industries. The steamships were English. Trains were literally transported from England to India on ships. Every track, every bolt, every nut, everything. So if you look at it, it is not a joke. It's a very, I told you, Indian drain did not happen literally. It happened in subtle ways. Havra Bridge in Kolkata, Victoria Memorial, New Delhi, any place where any resource was put in, it did not come from India. It came from England. They could have at least used pencils. Something they could have used here. Rubber, sharpener, everything from there. So if you look at it, our drain was not a random drain. It was till the last point. Why? Because this is the British interest. British did it between 1765 to 1947, wherein there is the only interest there. They're not here for good. British did not come here for civilizing us. They came here to loot India. But if they will take money and put it into ships and take it, somebody will say something. This is called the subtle cost of British rule in India. As I'm telling you, it is believed that out of this 40%, 12% was actually store purchases. So, I'll repeat each of the points when I'll go again to the PPT, but are you able to make sense of these 6 a little bit? I'll repeat it. But are you now able to? This should be a very important moment of understanding what is happening. Why is that India was not just looted, it was looted to the core. We paid for our own colonization. That is the quantum. If your blood does not boil now, when will it boil? That very simply, British rule was not something where we think of it as British literally looting, because that is the image which is pushed into our mind. A Britisher sneezes in India, that is also a drain. Because the fact that he is here in India and he's going to have a medicine which is bought from Indian revenue and a Britisher is going to become better is a drain from India. So understand this concept. We were literally dying. When I come back from the break, I will show you. Crores of Indians perished because they had no ounce of 1 drop of water or 3 to 4 grains of rice or wheat to eat. Not once, not twice, 22 famines happened in the British era. 22 famines. We had never seen such quantum, we had never seen such scale previously because of this drain. And then if you ask a Britisher, we gave you English, we gave you the railways, you take the railways back. And when we'll talk about the railways, I will share again an article written by me on railways. And I would expect you to read it, and it will give you a better perspective of how railways is even more dangerous. So, can I just repeat it and we can then take a break? Okay. See. What are the ways in which India was looted? The way India was looted was basically, you have bribes which were received by the officers from the Princess of Bengal. This was transferred into commodities and then to England. The private trade which the company servants did also was on commodities, which was sent to England. And the profits from oppressive land revenue policies were also converted to commodities and sent to England. So basically, commodities, their export facilitated was the value or currency of drain. So the drain happened in the form of commodities. Then comes the dividend and interest. Every dividend given to the company was out of Indian revenue. Any debt which was created in India or any loan taken by British to rule India was paid by Indian revenue, and any return or interest given on any investment is also out of Indian revenue. So if you look at it, either Indian revenue is being remitted as commodities or it is transferred as return on investment. These two things are clear? Okay. Thereafter, the most significant channel of drain were the home charges. Charges or taxes that were used by the British officers or people who were living in India during British rule. Includes pay, pension, training costs of civil and military personnel, pay of the Secretary of State and his establishment in London. By 1922, home charges accounted for 40% of total revenue, which was drained. And I'll discuss Dadabhai Naoroji and economic nationalism, I'll give you data with regards to what is the amount also. The next is store purchases. The government of India had purchased stores for military, civil and marine department, all in the English market. And on an average, 12% of that 40% of home charges was actually store purchases. Thereafter, any foreign capital investment. The aspect here is British capital investment in plantation, mines, cotton, jute mill, engineering work, any European agency house, further any industrial growth which did not happen in India was also an advantage to the Britisher. So therefore, if I add all of it, I get drain. Clear, everybody? Can we all agree to this slide that this is the way India got drain? Explain second point. Okay. I create Indigo. Indigo is loaded on a English ship. Then it goes to an English intermediary. Then it is sold by an English in the English market. So this commodity plus this whole supply chain, who gets the money out of it? The English. What is this? 40% is home charges. out of which 12% is store charges. So out of the total 40%, 12% is home charges. Store purchase rather. Okay. English education, Shivani, I'll come to that. We'll start that today, don't worry. Education policy, I'll discuss. Okay. Percentage was not fixed. We are saying that accounted for 12%. Are we clear? Can I take a break and then we talk about famines? Are you in a position? We'll talk about drain again when we'll talk about the concept of economic nationalism. But are we clear about this whole concept? Yes. So we have completed in a way economic policies of the British. We've understood the land revenue settlements. We've understood the concept of what we call as commercialization of agriculture, forced commercialization. We understood deindustrialization. And now we've understood the concept of drain. So if I give you a question like this, for example, I'll give you two questions. If I give you a question, for example, like this, the deindustrialization of India was intricately linked to the economic policy of the British. Explain. 250 words. You'll be able to write this type of question. I'll do some questions with you also, don't worry, previous year questions with you today, so as to give you an idea of how questions come out of this area, and prelims also, don't worry. So I'll do that also. Yes. Now if I give you the second type of question, the channels of drain of wealth from India were extremely diverse and based on commodities. Elucidate. 250 words. Again, can you conceptualize this in 1 to 2 minutes? I'm not saying you can write it right now. With one revision you can. But are you able to create a mental image of what type of question will this be? Because that is more important. Elucidate means to elaborate. So very simply, in mains examination, this is the type of questions which come. They ask you the concept itself. Thereafter, by the end of the class, I'll do certain previous year questions. I would have done it on Friday, but you're fresh. I'll do certain previous year questions to show you what are they asking vis-a-vis economic history. So the first question you have to tell how deindustrialization is linked to land revenue settlements and commercialization. And second, you don't make flowcharts, you write. And second question asks you the channels of drain. Just have to put in the examples. Yes, that is, you just put in the examples, Lakshmi, and then you will get the answer itself. You say first channel, second channel, third channel, fourth channel, fifth channel, sixth channel. Simple. Okay. Right? Can I take a break? Gorli, what do you mean by engaging? Okay. We'll take a break. Don't worry. Right. So it is 7:40. We come back at 7:50. And thereafter, what is left now is famines. And then we'll talk about the concept of transportation, 10 minutes discussion. and then we'll go into the concept of education policy. So 10 minutes, just refresh yourself. 3 not very heavy topics, but intricately related to each other. Okay, I've taken up your 1 minute. Okay, great. No issues. I give you 2 minutes back. No problem. Perfect, Chandrahas. That is the basic. See you. Welcome back. Pulkit, they somehow survived in permanent settlement. Subsistence farming, farming in the side, somehow. But that is the basic point, that they didn't survive. Most of them actually became tenants. So they got a very meager age from somebody. That's the point. Okay. Now, famines. Now, when we talk about famines, what is a famine? Famine is basically people's death due to man-made or natural shortages of food grains or hunger based death. You are hungry, you did not get food, so you died. Now, the British were asked this question. Why did famines happen so much in India? And the answer to that question which they gave, famine does not mean drought. Drought is extreme scarcity of water. Drought, famine different. Famine is when people literally die because they don't have anything to eat. Understand this. There's a difference between drought is a geographical phenomenon. This is not a geographical phenomenon. It's more or less in British India, it's a man-made disaster. Now, see, what do we mean by this concept? The British were asked this very simple question: why are there so many famines happening in India? The answer to that question which they gave was that it was because Indians were poor and poverty stricken. That was their answer. That naturally famine is going to happen because every Indian is poor. So therefore, every Indian is poverty stricken. Therefore, they will automatically start to see shortages or have no purchasing power. But if that is the case, then who made these Indians poor? The Britishers. There is no doubt that whatever famine I am going to discuss with you was a man-made disaster created by the British. The British destroyed agriculture through land revenue settlements, then through forced commercialization, decreased the supply of food grains. They controlled even parts of Southeast Asia from where they could import grains, but they didn't. And the worst disaster which just happened before independence, the Bengal famine of 1942-43, Indians were dying in India because of hunger, because of no food grains, and the Britishers were actually sending the food grains from India to their armies in the Second World War. And what is even more problematic is that they didn't care. They didn't care one bit. Why? Because it will take them 60 to 70 years to actually make a famine policy. The British did not act like a catalyst. British are the reason. In India, people could die of a lot of things. But people dying of hunger was very, very uncommon. Whichever age you go into, ancient, medieval, never. The scale and the frequency was never so big and so frequent. Now, why am I telling you this? Because UPSC gave a very interesting question. Though we discuss this concept every year, last time they gave a very interesting question in mains, which asked you this question. That why is that the frequency of famines exponentially increased after the grant of Diwani rights? And therefore, you have to understand the relationship between land revenue and commercialization, which I hope that you already have, and how it is linked to famines. That very simply, land revenue destroys agriculture. Forced commercialization is a process linked to land revenue itself, and therefore it creates famines, because famines are acute shortage of food grain. Food grain already is a problem. The peasant has been made into a landless labor. He does not have money, and therefore it was bound to happen that famines would happen. So I hope you're understanding the pretext here. The British can say a lot of things. An acute shortage of food in a given area due to natural or man-made reasons is called a famine. Further, what causes a famine is a question. Does poverty cause famine or famine cause poverty? The British would argue that the famines were caused by the poverty, and we would say that poverty causes famine. The basic point of the matter is, it is a direct consequence of the economic policy of the British, and there should be no doubt about this concept. So I hope that you are clear about this concept. It's not even a catalytic role, it's the reason. They are the sole reason why it happened. Over extraction, over assessment, forced commercialization. If you link all of this together, you get the answer to our problem, which is, why did famines increase after the British came? Because the British blatantly destroyed the countryside, the agriculture, and thereafter also made a shift to crops which were previously not required but were now required because of the concept. So see, it's not written in the other way around. Famines cause poverty and poverty cause famine. British scholars say that because famines are natural in India, that causes poverty. Because Indians are already poor, that is why it's causing poverty. We say that you made us poverty stricken, that is why famines are happening. So it's not the other way around. We tend to shift the argument towards the British. The British tend to say that you are the reason why it happened. So what is the core cause of this poverty is the question. The British would argue that famines are natural because you are poor, so poverty comes in. We say you made us poverty stricken, that is why famines came, that exaggerate poverty. Getting my point? Lakshmi, it's not written the other way around. It's actually based on which came first. That is the question. Okay. Now, to give you a quantum, don't learn this, do not learn this. Just to give you a quantum of what actually was the real situation on the ground, because I'll tell you, only question which can come from this area was this one, how does it happen? And the other is commissions. I will show. So the first point is, what is the correct answer? You know the correct answer. Poverty caused by the British are the reason for famines, not the other way around. Don't fall into this trap. Obviously. Okay. For UPSC will not ask you, give us the account of each and every famine. No. Now, under the East India Company, total 12 famines happened and 4 severe crises or scarcities were there. 69, 84, 92, 1803, 1833, 1837. Famine in Bengal claimed 1/3 of the province population, which we already discussed, if you remember. the reason why Hastings was sent. This was induced by Clive. Then severe famine in the whole of North India. 92 Madras, then Northwestern Province and Awadh. In the Guntur famine, 2 lakh people out of the 5 lakh population died. Imagine, 2 lakh out of 5 lakh dead. Then in 1837, there was a famine in Upper India, which is Northern India. And what is the more cold-blooded concept? That the British did not even try to formulate a policy to prevent these famines. They just said that it is part and parcel of how India actually operates. Now, under Crown administration, once the British East India Company is gone, it was no better. It was no better. 10 severe famines and numerous scarcities. 1860-61, you have Delhi, Agra. For the first time, authorities wanted to look into the cause intensity. The first major report which was made about famines was Braid-Smith report on famine, but no formulation of any policy till that point. 1866, the Odisha famine. Odisha, Madras, Bihar, northern Bengal. 13 lakh people died alone in Odisha itself. No steps again taken. 1868, famines in northern and central India. 1876-78, under the period of Lord Lytton, great famine affected Madras, Bombay, UP, Punjab. Many villages were fully depopulated. 0 people survived. Estimated 5 million people perished in a single year. 5 million means 50 lakh. Between 1850 to 1900, 2.8 crore people died in famines. And what we see is half-hearted attempts by the government to do anything. If I only add what we've just discussed, not every famine taken into account, 5 crore people already died. What do you mean by famine? According to you? No, according to me or everybody, famine means acute shortage of food, in turn leading to death. There's only one definition of famine. So, yes, bhukmari in Hindi, if you want to say. Basic point is 5 crore people dead in 50 to 60 years. This is the quantum of death which happened. Quantum of death. Further, this is what matters to you. This, and this. First, second, third. First is called the Strachey Commission, 1880. It argued that supply of raw materials and food grains should be there. Suggested that suspension and remission of land revenue should be there. Then 1883, just 3 years after it, a provincial famine code was formulated, but again never applied. Then in 1896-97, again a great famine in every province. In consequence of that, you have the Lyell Commission, and then you have the MacDonald Commission, which was again about famine relief should be the responsibility of the provinces or the states. And one of the greatest and the worst famines in India, 1942-43 Bengal famine. 1.5 lakh to 3 million people perished in basically a man-made famine in which there were also epidemics. So famine happened, malaria, cholera, smallpox all started to spread. And why did it happen? Because army was getting the food which people should have got. Gross mismanagement, deliberate profiteering, hoarding, rationing methods were wrong. Burma and Southeast Asia, rice which was coming to India was stopped. And thereafter, crop failure since 1938. The point is, you don't have to remember any of this. Just remember this. Strachey, Lyell, MacDonald. Strachey, Lyell, MacDonald. SLM. See, there are two aspects here. You understand why are they happening. You understand why they are happening. Yes. You understand why famines are happening. Come on. Yes or no? Yes. That is the one type of question which comes. The second is SLM. They can very simply add or ask you to put them in chronological order. Pache, Lyle, and McDowell. That's it. You can do that. No, very easy. SLM. So if it's clear, we close this topic. Very small topic. I told you small 3-4 topics we have to do. Okay, perfect. We'll come back to these previous year questions when we are done with our basic discussion. We'll do it at 9:15ish. Okay. Profiteering means to get profit. Okay. Not 1/3 population died because of crash crops. 1/3 died because of the fact that there is acute shortage of food grains, not because cash crops. That's a long-term cause, but not a direct cause. That was because of Clive's over extraction. See, can I say that economic part is clear? Because what I'm doing is I'm just consolidating this area, and then we need to go into education policy. Okay, they will not ask you to put for famines in chronology as it is. They are not in one province, they are in multiple provinces. They will not be able to make a question only out of it, right? So now this is the last major topic out of economic, and thereafter we move to social. That is the most important discussion we have hereafter. Okay, we've discussed land revenue, we've discussed commercialization, we've discussed deindustrialization, we've discussed drain, we discussed famines. Now, in the economic sphere, there are 2 to 3 things which the British introduced, but people tend to argue that they were again positive developments. 2 of them would be railways, and the second one would be telegraph. Now, as with regards to the police article, I hope that you have read it or you've tried to make sense of that article generally. I'll be sharing again and ask the team to upload another article on railways, which will give you a perspective with regards to the importance of Dalhousie in creation of railways itself. What was the purpose of the railways, and generally how it is related to the nationalist movement. But let's talk about the basic argument. People tend to argue that it's a good thing. Railways are a good thing, the only positive thing which the British did in India. But if you understand the underlying concept, you will realize that the reason is not that they were doing it to connect India. The reason is that they were actually connecting all the nodes of exploitation, wherein railways and telegraph were 2 processes which were introduced to accelerate economic exploitation of India. Accelerate economic exploitation of India. Railways were not introduced because they thought that Indians should travel better. It was all about accelerating the economic exploitation of India via quicker movement of what we call as goods and services. And understand one thing, that once railways come, telegraph have to come. I'll show you what is a telegraph. Because if a train leaves a station, the next station should know that the train has left. For that, a telegraph is needed, so that quick messages can be sent between stations. So railway and telegraph go together in that regard. So the initial movement of goods and services in India were either based on bullock cart, camel, pack horses, and there were also steamships which were used in rivers. The Grand Trunk Road had been revived by the British by 1839, 1850. But the earliest suggestion with regards to making a railway to exploit India was given in 1831. And the 1831 railway line in Madras was technically not railways, because the wagons were actually pulled off by literally horses. So imagine that today, Vande Bharat, there's no engine in the front but horses. So technically does not become a train. That's not a train, that's just horses pushing railway wagons. The first proposed line, which was steam driven or steam engine, was in 1834. And as much as there was a lot of political support, a lot of financiers vis-a-vis creating railways in India, the government of India was not ready to put in their money. Wagon means the coach. So though there is a lot of potentiality with regards to railways, the British initially, government of India initially, were not ready to put in their own money. Rather, they tried to attract private money via a guarantee on minimum guarantee on their investment. What does that mean? That basically if there is 100 rupees you apply, 105 you will for sure get. So the initial capital for the railways in India was actually via the private sector. The first railway line in India will be laid between Bombay and Thane. Thane is nothing but Thane. Opened for traffic in 1853. Dalhousie will then propose 4 main trunk lines, basically connecting the 4 major points: Delhi, Calcutta, Madras, Bombay, and then again to Delhi. And by 1869, close to 4,000 miles of railways had been built. But because it was a costly and slow affair, later Government of India also decided to pitch in. So it became a private and public investment. And after independence, we made it fully. When I say Government of India here, it means British Government of India. We became fully public. Now, the more telling story is this map. Wherein this is the 1909 map of Indian Railways. Then everybody is following the basic point. First railway line 1853 between Bombay and Thane. Private investment first, then public investment comes in. Now, why am I showing you this map? Because this is 1909 map of the Indian Railways. What you will see is that the concentration of lines are more towards the ports. The 3 major port cities were actually given the most important position, and that to Bengal the most. So in order to effectively exploit this whole Doab sector, they needed to create a certain type of network, and that network was linked to Bengal. Further, the way Bombay was connected was the agrarian sectors of Gujarat, the agrarian sectors of Central India, and the other parts of India where there is cash crop production of food, or what we call as grain production. The nodes were basically these port cities. So there was no line which was made unnecessarily. Every line was made for a purpose. Certain lines, for example, in these areas were made for military purposes. So as for defense, and but the basic point was economic exploitation. Again, don't have to learn it. I'm just trying to show you that we already had a very intricate system of railways before the British left itself. And because this is the most fertile and prosperous sector, its effective exploitation needed even more intricate lines. So the most density of lines is actually in the UP, Bihar and Orissa sector, which again is not an irony that it is the permanent settlement area. So with regards to the Afghanistan-Pakistan sector, it was about defense. Other than that, it was about connecting ports. And thereafter, it was about effective exploitation of the Doab region, or what we call as Ganga Yamuna, the region in between that. Again, just to give you a standard understanding, nothing more. Now, after 1880s, railways were built through private enterprise as well as state agency, which we discussed. By 1905, 28,000 miles of railways. Primary consideration was to link raw material producing areas with ports, interiors with ports. Because as I told you, there is a railway, there has to be a telegraph. The first telegraph line is between Calcutta to Agra, and thereafter Dalhousie will also introduce what is called the postage department and postage stamps. So the post and telegraph department will be established in the same year, 1853. And initially the British were actually dumb with regards to how postage worked. They actually used to say that half a ana for any distance. But that was changed after the British realized that you could send a package from Jammu and Kashmir to Kanyakumari for half an ana, which made no sense. So they said, now we will charge on distance. We'll charge on distance. But the $1 million question is, what is a telegraph? So this is a telegraph. So there are two ends to the telegraph, A and B. One is the sender, the other one is receiver. So this is the sender. This is the one who receives it. And the concept is very simple. It's like a circuit. You have one basic wooden thing, and you have this basic concept. Every time you tap it, the circuit is completed. So yes, the sender can be receiver, receiver can be sender, not an issue. So every time you tap it, the circuit gets completed. So there's a small beep which is produced. That beep is then heard by the machine on the other end, and it notes what is called the Morse code. It notes what is called dot and dashes. So you have tit, 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 tit. So you can actually note it as per the taps. So for example, if it's a long tap, it becomes a dash. And if two taps means, so there is a whole concept wherein you have two taps, dash, three taps, it can be A, B. So what the receiver does is that he receives it, then he decodes it. So you can't send very long messages. You can't send very long messages. But the concept is of electronically sending signals which can then be decoded into words. This is a necessity, as I told you, for railways, because If you don't have this concept, this is the place where it happens. This is where the contact point is. If it does not happen, the railway schedule will never work only. If a train leaves a station and it has to reach the next station, it has to know when it has left. And this is done over physical lines. There are physical telegraph lines. So this will go to a telegraph line, and thereafter it will be received in a telegraph line. So you need to put in proper what we call as poles and telegraph lines, and we don't use telegraph now. The most interesting aspect is that one of the reasons why the 1857 failed and in some places it actually succeeded was about how effectively the Sipahis were able to kill the or cut the telegraph lines. So when they did it in Meerut, they cut the telegraph line, so Delhi never got to know. But when it happened in other places, they were able to send a message. So telegraph is a very quick way, and there was telegraph lines, literal telegraph lines were laid between India and England, so that the Secretary of State or the British could actually communicate with the Governor General here. So telegraph was a very major project, and for a very, very long time, the only way to send a message quickly. The one thing which killed telegraph is basically emails. Electronic mail, this is your electronic mail at this point of time. This is an equivalent. It was a revolution in itself, sure, but this is your equivalent to an email, right? So basic understanding with regards to transportation and railways is done. As I said, I will share an article with you so that you understand it better in that regard. Okay. No, it is underwater telegraph lines are there. Now, before I go to education policy, now please understand something. We discussed decline. Thereafter, we discussed advent. Then we discussed expansion. Then we've discussed consolidation. And what we've completed right now is economic policy. Land revenue, commercialization, deindustrialization, and drain, along with transportation. Now, I hope these basic building blocks are clear. How we are progressing vis-a-vis the story of Indian history. The next topic we do now is called social policy. Till this point, whatever we've discussed is basically the decline, their advent, their expansion, the judiciary, the ICS, the police. Thereafter, the core interest of them, which is economic policy. We'll discuss constitutional history tomorrow. What we now have to understand is social policy. What do I mean by that? I think the SMEs pushed the article link for both police and railways as of right now. 8:27, you can see. Yes, great. Now, the social policy has, what we will cover is basically two things: education and socio-religious reform. And when we are done with that, we will go into resistance. Now, what I want you to understand before I start education policies, what is the basic concept of social policy? Are we all clear with regards to what we've done till this point? No basic, we've created a certain image. Now we need to put in a little bit more detail into it. Now try to understand. Try to understand. The British are here. You know it, I know it. Not for anything good. They're here to exploit India. They're here to exploit India. And if they're here to exploit India, they need to also do a drama. They also need to do a drama. How can a Britisher go and say to the French, the only reason I'm in India is because I'm looting them? How can the British justify its existence in India to the other powers, or to Europe itself, or to America itself, or to anyone? So now the question is about justification of rule. We know that it is economic exploitation. We know that it is economic exploitation, but you can't say that. You can't say that my only reason is to destroy India. So to justify their rule, they introduce a weird concept, a self-inflicted burden on themselves, which is called white man's burden. And the white man's burden is that the British will justify to themselves that we are in India here for a civilizing mission. India is the land of barbaric people, of the brown man, who does not understand what is democracy, who does not understand what is modern technology, who does not understand English. And we need to teach them. We, the land of temples, we, the land of architecture which is unmatched across the world, we, the land of Aryabhatta, we, the land of Varamir, Brahmagupta, we, the land of Kalidas, needed to be taught literature, maths, modern science. And this was a burden which the English could not sleep with. Every Englishman used to sleep and used to get up in the night and say, no, 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 India is still barbaric. We need to do something. This is the burden which the white men put on themselves. That we can't sleep until and unless the whole world knows that Shakespeare existed. That the whole world knows what is Latin. The whole world knows about English. And this is the justification which the East India Company will give to itself, and the British gave to its citizens. That if for example, Clive killed 50,000 people in a war, how does he justify East India Company being in India? The basic point is, it is linked to this burden. It is linked to this burden. That अब तो we had to kill 50,000 people. अब तो मारना ही था उनको. We had to do it. That is the burden. I can't sleep because of India. So I need to go to India. I need to loot them, and then I can sleep better. But this a Britisher can't say. A Britisher can't say this. That I can't sleep because India is prosperous and I need to loot it. They will not say that. Rather, they will say, I can't sleep because Indians are barbarians, savages, don't know how to use fork and knife. This logic will be applied in India. This logic will be applied in Africa. Wherever there is colonialism, there is this self-inflicted bhar which these white men take on themselves, that we need to solve the issues of the world. Now, what I'm trying to argue here is that this is a drama which they do. This is a drama which they do because they need to somehow sleep. So in order to create this argument that we are in India for good, that good is defined via white man's burden. So when I next time say white man's burden, I hope you will understand this self-inflicted burden on the chest of all these white men, that we need to find a solution for the underdevelopment of India, the barbarity of India. Barbarian means, how do I say? They barbarians would be, what is the synonym of barbarian? Is barbarian. Barbarian would mean that they're not civilized. Then you will ask me what is civilized or not. Uncivilized, you will say. But savage, uncivilized, barbarian, same thing. Not vulgar is not the right word. You will say that basically these people have no, I'll give a very backward if you want to say, but that is also not true. It's the concept of you not conducting yourself in certain ways. So barbarian is that word. Not cultured, no level of decency, but who defines decency? Something can be decent for you, cannot be decent for me. Very relative terms in that regard. Okay. Very simply, when I say white man's burden, now it will make sense. Technically, the best definition of a barbarian is English only. They are actually barbarians. So if you can look at it in that sense. Are we clear? When I say white man's burden, now it makes sense because I am building up to something. Okay, now see. Now, the British in the background are looting India. In the background are looting India. But they need to justify their rule. And this justification is linked to the white man's burden. But as one of you already pointed out, that education is sometimes seen as a positive impact of the British. So education policy is seen as the first intervention into the social so as to create an image that Indians are being reformed. But for me and you, in education policy is a very important concept because it embodies a debate within it. It embodies a debate within it, which is called the Orientalist versus Anglicanist or utilitarianism debate. Utilitarianism debate. And the education policy basically gives you an insight into philosophy of rule. Philosophy of rule. What I mean by philosophy of rule is that how should British rule India? How should British rule India is this basically is linked to this debate. So the purpose of education policy is to discuss two things. First, the intellectual context or the philosophy of the rule and the constant internal debate which is there. And second is to understand the education policy literally. So if you understand the purpose of this thematic, I would like to discuss the concept of philosophy of rule. That education gives you an insight into how the British are debating amongst themselves on how should we rule India. Philosophy of rule means the purpose of this discussion is twofold. First, the education policy itself, should it be English education, should it be vernacular education? But in that question is a larger question, which is what is the basic philosophy of the British in India? What is their rule philosophy? How should we rule India? That is the question here. How should we rule India? They know what are they there for. They are there for exploitation. But now that we have India under our control, how do we rule it? And that got somehow caught up with this education policy question. And I would like to discuss with you this concept of Orientalist, Anglicanist, or what we call as utilitarianism. Can I do that? Are you getting the point? If it's not making sense, you tell me. Purpose should be very clear in your mind. See, British were here for what? They were here for economic policy. They were here for exploitation. Sure. You are here for what? You are here to clear the examination? Yes or no? Yes. You are here to become an IAS officer. So, same way, British were here to loot India. Yes. But now that you have become a part of this course, how do you use that course matters on your own philosophy. Meaning, some of you will come in class, some of you will not answer, some of you will not say yes, some of you will just literally enjoy the show. That is your philosophy. Some of you engage in class, some of you ask questions, some of you ask irrelevant questions, some of you ask relevant questions, some of you ask just random questions. No issues. That is your philosophy of rule. I'll be talking about British, you will be asking me about Ashoka. Issue, different question. Some of you are going to use the test platform well. Some of you will answer right. Some of you will do something. Some of you will do something. That is called your philosophy. What is your philosophy of your preparation? Some of you will not sleep. Some of you will sleep. This is the concept of how do you use it. All of you are here for the same reason. But how you use the course is your philosophy. Yes or no? This is a basic point. Same way, the British are here to loot. They know that. Loot ke jana hai. We have to destroy India. But now that I have access to India, how should we rule it? How? I know how to loot it, which I showed you. Land revenue, deindustrialization, this and that. But it cannot be na, that a Britisher is sitting on the couch, they are looting, but they can't, they have to rule India also. Na? They have to rule India. Because they have to do this drama that yes, we are ruling, but in the background, they're technically pickpocketing our purse. They have to do this drama of rule. And that rule needs a philosophy. Should we let them do what they're doing? Should we intervene? Should we do something or not? That is why philosophy of rule only comes after expansion and consolidation. Once that the British have established themselves as the paramount power, Now the question will come, how will you rule? Are you getting my point? The philosophy of rule is, how should I do a drama to show to the people that I'm ruling whilst I'm actually exploiting? Now, does it make sense? Everybody, I need your assertion on this. It's a very interesting topic, but it needs a little bit of understanding. Yes? Okay. Very good. Perfect. So you now understand how and what. Okay. Perfect. Now, there were two philosophies which existed. One are called Orientalists and the other are called utilitarians or Anglicanists. Anglicanists mean the people who want to make everything English. Anglicanists. First, I'll give you the example. For example, you have Warren Hastings. You have Thomas Munro, Alexander Reed, William Jones, Colebrook, Colin Mackenzie. These are British officers. And then on the other spectrum, Mackenzie. On the other spectrum, you have, for example, William Bentinck, T.B. Macaulay, Cornwallis, J.S. Mill, James Mill, and more or less every Governor General after. Every Governor General after Bentinck. So I'm trying to give you practical example here that there are basically these two types of officers. There are two types of officers and they represent two types of philosophy. Can I discuss their philosophies in a comparative way? Very, very interesting discussion. Yes, very good. Perfect. So what is their basic concept? Orientalist, Anglicanist, or utilitarian. Now, what does an Orientalist say? What does an Orientalist say? The Orientalists believe, that India should be ruled through their ancient institutions. These institutions had become corrupt and fell to disuse. So, we should revive their systems and rule through it. So, Orientalists will technically argue that rule like a Mughal, that we are an extension of the Mughals. They want to, these institutions could be any, social, political, any. They want to mask the British rule. They want to mask the British rule as an extension of previous rulers. But what is the point? By doing so, there will be no rebellion or opposition to rule. Because for the people, nothing changed only. For the people, nothing changed. I am a white Mughal. There were the Mughals. I am a white Mughal. So, a very good example of this is, if you remember, the Diwani Adalat or the Nizamat Adalat. That, see, Pandit is sitting there, Maulvi is sitting there, your people. Only the European officer is sitting on them. I am not saying I am going to pronounce a judgment. No, no. Your Pandit said, feed 1000 Brahmins. So I am also saying it. So they fear rebellion. They fear rebellion. And they want to avoid it by actually not touching too many things. So their understanding is very simply, if I had to say in one word, is not to fundamentally change anything or any social institution. Yeah, in a way, as you said, as a hands-off policy. Hands-off policy, but the later generation was about revival of old institutions. Revival of old institutions. Simply, the fact is that they argue that we will rule through their old institutions. So we will not touch too many things. We will just come, sit, exploit, and go. See, because there is exploitation, there will be rebellion. So the question is how to avoid it. And how you avoid it if you're saying, no, your previous rulers were also doing it. Old institutions would mean, for example, Mughal institutions. They argue that they were also doing, we are also doing. We are nothing different. But that is technically not true. Because Mughals didn't take the money out of India and take it anywhere. Mughals took out, if Mughals are extracting revenue, they are investing it back into India only. Because Taj Mahal is not made in Central Asia, it is made in India. So, Mughals are not imperialistic. Mughals are not colonialists. You are, because you take everything from India and take it to England. So, very simply, we are Akbar. We are great. We will rule through your own institutions. Now, can anybody tell me what is going to be the problem in the long run? What is the problem in this whole model for the British, not for us? For us, everything is fine. For the British, what is the issue in this approach? It's not conflict of interest. Understand one thing. Were old institutions geared for proper exploitation of peasantry? No. So, can you efficiently and effectively exploit India via this approach? No. That is the point. So, the problem in this approach, the problem is effective and efficient exploitation cannot happen. And this is why these officers will dominate the state policy between 1765 to 1835. After 1835, things will change. So very simply, Orientalists argue that we rule through their old institutions, don't change anything, and their way of avoiding rebellion is not to touch anything and least intervention possible, revive old institutions. But the problem is British interest is going to get undercut. Orientalist understanding clear, everybody? Then I move to Anglicanist. Yes, very good. Now comes a group called the Utilitarians and Anglicanists. Now, UPSC aspirants are born utilitarians. Now, very simply, utilitarians are based on the philosophy of a person called Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham was a thinker. Jeremy Bentham was a thinker. He's a thinker, and he introduced the concept of utility. He introduced the concept of utility. So, if you've ever done economics in your life, in school and all, so you would know the concept of marginal utility and total utility. For example, if you eat one gulab jamun, you feel a lot of happiness. But then when you eat the second gulab jamun, then you don't feel it because your marginal utility increase is very less. Initial gratification is good, but later it is less. But we are not discussing it in that context. Utility here is how can you do what is called the concept of greatest good of the greatest number. Jeremy Bentham's basic understanding was, his philosophy was greatest good of the greatest number. Shruti, I did. You don't even remember. We did this whole concept. The greatest good of the greatest number. I remember. I don't know how you don't remember. Greatest good of greatest number means what? Means that, for example, I will say to you, go and revise. No. It's not about input and output. It's two concepts together. I will say go and revise, and I will give you a question. Now, some of you will solve it, some of you won't. But by doing that, I am doing greatest good of greatest number. For example, this is used in state policy quite a lot. For example, there's a dam being constructed. A dam is getting constructed. 50 villages will go underwater. 1 lakh people will get affected. However, through that dam, 500 villages will be given water and 50 lakh people will get drinking water. Should this dam be constructed? Yes or no? Yes. If you are saying yes, then you are talking like a utilitarian, wherein you're talking about greatest good of greatest number. Not good for the 1 lakh people, but good for the 50 lakh people. So greatest good of the greatest number, that is the first concept. Again, understand this. Greatest good of the greatest number is based on, there will be somebody who will always cry, but there will also be people who will always get something out of it. If the number of the people who get a benefit is more than the people who don't get a benefit, then that concept is accepted. So, greatest good of the greatest number. But the greatest good of the greatest number, if you put it into state philosophy for the British, the English argue, why should we not effectively exploit India? Our good is in effectively exploiting India via more intervention. If by intervention we can get greatest good with the greatest of numbers, then why not? So though it is a social philosophy, when it goes into political philosophy, it becomes dangerous. So the utilitarian concept is that for effective and efficient exploitation of India, we need to change the institutions for British interest to be served. To be served. Further, the intervention should also be administratively efficient. Should administratively be efficient, and the greatest good, which is British interest, should be achieved. But now the question is that if you will change institutions, then there will be rebellion. So what to do about rebellion? Rebellions can be avoided by creating a class or section of Indians who believe in the white man's burden, are indoctrinated by English knowledge, so that they think, speak, and eat like a Indian, like a English, and look Indian. And this is what is the concept of middle class intelligentsia. That is why education became an issue. They said that what we will do is that we will make the Indians believe that we are doing good. So rather than arguing that we will not touch anything and we will not get rebellion, we will rather create a new loyal class which will think that we are doing the greatest good of the greatest number. Are you getting the point of a utilitarian? Utilitarianism is about serving British interest via creating an administrative machinery which is very, very unique and very, very important vis-a-vis their own interest. But also they say, okay, there will be rebellion. No, what we will do is we will create an Indian who thinks like a Britisher, who speaks like a Britisher, who eats like a Britisher, but is actually Indian in picture. This is basically called the intellectual control of Indians. But it's a double-edged sword. I will tell you it's a double-edged sword. I will tell you the problem with regards to that. And there is one more very important concept for utilitarians to do this. See, I want to sell cigarettes, but everybody in India drinks bidi. Then how can I sell cigarettes? So the utilitarian will say, teach them how to use a cigarette. Then you can create the demand for cigarettes. The pants which we wear, for this shirt I am wearing, see, we didn't wear shirts, but the British machine only makes shirts. So if the British don't teach me that you look better, an civilized Indian wears a shirt, then I will start to think like that. And when I will start to think like that, I will try to buy a shirt. So for the industrial exploitation of India, I also need to make their tastes British. So the utilitarian argues that for effective exploitation, create the demand for English goods, so change their taste according to English needs. If you look at it, utilitarians are extremely smart because they are able to see a larger picture here. Orientalists are myopic in their vision, that we will not touch anything, we will not do anything, no fundamental change. But if I'm a Britisher, it doesn't serve my interest. If I still teach them how to wear a dhoti, then how can I sell them a pant? Think like a Britisher here. If you will keep on reviving their old institutions, they will never westernize. And if they will not westernize, they will never actually do or have demand for English goods. Orientalists will argue our interest comes first. So for effective exploitation, change the institutions and make them feel that changing this institution is doing greatest good for the greatest number. But what they're actually doing is that they're actually creating an Indian who thinks like a Britisher, who speaks like a Britisher, who eats like a Britisher, who now will sit on a dining table and eat that roti and that rice with a spoon. If there will be no demand for spoons, how will you sell a spoon in India? Are you getting my point? This is the way of westernizing the Indians to become like Britishers. Are you getting my point? Come on, tell me. Are you able to understand the grand plan here? And now tell me, in education, an Orientalist will support English education or vernacular education? Vernacular means language of Indians. Vernacular. Because he thinks that teaching them in their own languages will not make them rebel. But an Anglicanist is going to say, teach them English. Teach them English so that they think like an Englishman. But this is a very dangerous sword. Can I discuss the other side of the story? You see, it is the utilitarians who actually also create nationalism. It is the utilitarians who actually also create the nationalism or actually dig the hole in which the British are going to fall. Because if you are going to teach an Indian English education, they will get to know about freedom, exploitation, fraternity, liberty. Now, if you are thinking like an Englishman, you can decode their exploitation also. So if I am studying in vernacular and I don't know what is actually happening, I will never be able to decode what the British are actually doing to me. But now, in order to make me buy a pant, the British actually took a gun and shot themselves. Because by teaching me how to wear a pant, by teaching me to be loyal to them, I now can also buy books which teach me that if somebody destroys your peasantry, it is wrong. And therefore, when Dadabhai Naroji, when G.V. Joshi, when R.C. Dutt, when M.G. Ranade are going to talk about exploitation of India, that was not, the nationalists did not fall from the sky. The nationalists were created by the same education policy. So, though in the short term it will help the British, in the long term the same loyalists will become social reformers, will become nationalists, and will again be the reason why the British will be removed from India. So utilitarians will prevail after 1835, but will also be the reason for the demise of the British in India. Are you able to understand the context here? This is the larger way in which the whole colonial rule works. If Orientalists would have prevailed, India would not have ever understood what is happening to itself. Rather, they taught us their ways, but we also understood their exploitation. And ironically, that is why it is going to take us close to 100 years to understand what was actually happening. So this Anglicanist and Orientalist debate is not a joke. It's actually not a joke. It's a much bigger concept which is related to us. And education policy, which people just brush off, was that fundamental pillar on which Indian nationalism became popular or became possible. If you understand this debate, then we can talk about education policy. This is the first part of the story done. Yes? So nobody is asking you this, I could have easily left all of this. I'm actually teaching you at an optional level. But I hope that you are able to understand how the British actually work in India. Philosophy of rule, I'll do previous year questions, don't worry. Philosophy of rule is actually one of the most important bedrocks. Now that you understand this, it will be easier for me to tell you why is that now social religious reform will happen. Why is that nationalism will happen? A very basic question which a lot of teachers cannot answer is where did the nationalists come from? The nationalists did not come from outside. They were a product of this system which the British actually used to exploit us itself. It was a major backfire moment. It literally backfired on them. So if it's clear, a small discussion I want to do with you, and thereafter I will go into previous year questions 2 to 3. Yes? Okay, perfect. Now, when we talk about education policy, along with pragmatism means practical, to be practical, that demanded continuation of existing systems. There was also a respect for traditional Indian culture that expressed itself in Warren Hastings. It meant an attempt to learn about Indian culture through the study of Sanskrit, Persian language, use of knowledge in matters of governance. However, these Orientalists dominate the first part of what we call as Indian history or modern India. And we can see that in what they're doing. For example, Warren Hastings will establish Calcutta Madarsa. You know, see, capitalist Orientalist different. Madarsa is established by a Britisher. Why? Because he thinks old institutions should be revived. And he will say, study Muslim law and subjects. Then Jonathan Duncan is going to establish Sanskrit College at Banaras and say, study Hindu law and philosophy. Thereafter, Fort William College had been established by Wellesley, which will be closed later. But the most important institution which still today survives as an example of Orientalism is nothing but the Asiatic Society of India, now previously called Asiatic Society of Bengal. William Jones had established in 1784. Again, the basic task of these institutions were translate Sanskrit texts, translate Muslim law, translate Hindu law. Let's try to ask the Pandit what it is, tell us what it is. They will not use their own mind. They will go to Pandits, Maulvis and Qazis to find knowledge. And that is why there's a person called Colebrook. I gave you his name. He actually wrote a book which is called The Gentoo Law of India. The Gentoo Law of India. Unfortunately, what he means is Hindu Law of India. Hindu became Gentoo, separate issue altogether. But Gentoo Law of India basically is a book which was written by Colebrook, who wrote Hindu law. But he got that Hindu law from Pandits. But Pandits are technically not law officers. So they are distorting Indian history also equally as much as they are reconstructing it or reviving it. Now, the Anglicans also existed. The Anglicans also existed. But because most of the Anglicans were missionaries, in India as it is till 1813, British East India Company did not allow missionaries to come to India. So what they did was that they actually operated from a from a Dane colony or a Danish colony. So they actually came to Sirampur and at Madras from the Danish colony, and from time to time they were trying to push the Bible, were trying to push English education, but very simply till 1813 and basically till 1833 there was no call which was taken. So while English education was taught in the charity schools in Calcutta, Madras and Bombay, the English East India Company did not support directly either the Orientalists or the Anglicans. So be it the Orientalists or the Anglicans, standard policy was there, not touching either. But we can very safely say that initial officers were Orientalists. So you can see that right now, who has an edge, Orientalist or an Anglican? Orientalist, very good. Now then, what changed? In 1813, and this is the last discussion I have, and then I discuss the questions with you. In 1813, what happens is that, and that we will discuss tomorrow, comes the Charter Act. Comes the Charter Act. We will discuss this tomorrow. But under the Charter Act, 1 lakh rupees was allocated by the Court of Directors for educational purposes. That's it. They said, take 1 lakh rupees and teach these natives. Now there is money involved. 1 lakh rupees is a very big amount. Now there was money involved. So now it becomes literally Orientalist versus Anglican. Who will get this money? Who will get this money? And there is constant debate happening. Orientalists saying we should use this money for vernacular education. Teach them their own culture. While the Anglicanists are saying no, we should go for English education and teach them Western education. So now these two camps are constantly fighting. These two camps are constantly fighting. And that for the same reason, till 1823, this money was not even released because they thought that they will kill each other over it. But the main shift will happen. The main shift will happen when in 1833, Bentinck will become Governor General. Governor General. He was a utilitarian himself. But what he will do is that he will appoint a person called T.B. Macaulay as the president of a committee which had been formed, called the General Committee for Public Instruction. Basically, Education Ministry, you can think of it. And Macaulay and Bentinck were proper the new type of officers which were coming, who knew that India needed to be exploited. And now Macaulay is going to say a very important minute. Minute means a memo. In a minute, he will say a very important line, which will shift the focus away from the English, from the Orientalists to the English. So, as soon as the Charter Act allocates 1813, in 1813, 1 lakh money or 1 lakh rupees annually. The debate will be now about what should the money be used for. So it was about encouraging learning of the natives, reviving and improving literature, to promote sciences within the natives itself. The Anglicanist group did not believe in the Orientalist model, and due to this controversy between Orientalism and Western education, till 1823 the money will not be given. Thereafter, yes, the same person who made the Indian Penal Code, yes. In 1823, then the General Committee of Public Instruction will be set up. Most of the members were Orientalists. Expansion of traditional Indian languages will happen. However, the debate will keep on going on which should be the language. Macaulay will be made the president of the General Committee of Public Instruction in 1834, and he will now be the one who will say and will get encouragement from people such as Raja Ram Mohan Roy also. And Lord Benedict is going to end this debate via a very important minute which Lord Macaulay gave. Can I read out the Macaulay minute to you? And this statement will forever defeat the Orientalists, but was also a disrespect to our own culture. And that is why once Macaulay will give this minute, English education will become the standard education policy of India. English medium will be the concept of Western education. And he advocated for what is called the concept of downward filtration, and he favored the concept of Anglicans. Can I discuss this very important minute with you? Then we do previous year questions. Yes, we can. Very good. He said that I have never found one among them means Orientalists, who could deny that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. The intrinsic superiority of Western literature is indeed fully admitted by the members of the committees who support Orientalist plan of education. He very simply said that one shelf of a European library is equal to Vedas, Upanishads, every other text which was produced in India. And therefore, this will pivot the English orientation towards English as a medium of instruction, and Western education will win. What is downward filtration? Okay. Tell me one thing. When you have a plant in a pot, this is the pot, and you have soil till this point. You have soil till this point, and then you have the plant. When you water the plant, do you dig the hole into the plant and put the water inside? No. You just put it here and it automatically percolates down. Yes. This is called downward filtration. We will discuss this point tomorrow, that what the English thought was that we will teach the educated, will teach the middle and upper class. Upper class and middle class we will teach. This education will automatically percolate to the lower classes. That will never ever happen in India, but that is what they believed in. Trickle down theory or downward filtration. So before we go to previous year questions, tomorrow when I start again, I will discuss now the committees. Woods Dispatch, Hartog Committee, this committee, that committee, which is the prelims oriented question which comes from this area. But if I asked you a question, why is the education policy an important example of what we call as philosophy of rule? Or when I ask you who is an Orientalist and an Anglican, now you will be in a position to answer that. Yes. Also, very simply, when I ask you how is the philosophy of rule or utilitarians creating the context for nationalism or social religious reform, you understand that also? That very simply, it was a double-edged sword which they created. Though in short term it will help their trade, but in the long term it is going to backfire on them. So tomorrow what we will do is, we'll finish education policy. 90% is done, 10% is left, and we'll do the concept of constitutional changes. We'll discuss Regulating Act, Pitt's India Act, 1793, 1813, 1833, 1853 Charter Acts. Right? Make sense? Yes, he does. Clear? So now ready for questions? Double-edged sword means that it cuts the way the British wanted, but they cut itself also. Okay, very good. So I hope that you at least see, as I said, these things you will not find in books. That is why I am trying to give you this understanding and knowledge, because I believe that you deserve to know. That is the basic point. Because it's easily something which anybody can leave. But I am discussing it with you because you deserve to know how British politics works and how nationalism is actually intrinsically related to something which happened 30, 40 years before. Okay. Now, because be a little bit ready, certain questions, and in the end, leaderboard also. Okay. We already discussed this. We'll discuss this. Okay. Wellesley established the Fort William College at Calcutta because it's a 2020 question. He was asked by the Board of Controls at London to do so. He wanted to revive interest in Orientalist learning in India. He wanted to provide William Carey and his associates employment. He wanted to train British civilians for administrative purposes in India. Come on. Everybody has to answer. 15. This I can give you more seconds here. Come on. 4. Yes. Don't overthink. Be very simply. You know it. Fort William College, ICS. We've already discussed it. Perfect. 54% of you are totally correct. I don't know why 35% you're talking about Wellesley and Fort William College. In what context did we actually do Fort William College? He created this college to train British civilians as ICS. And then it was shut down by the Board of Control and Haileybury College was introduced. So, why are you answering this? Because we did education policy, that is why. You're taking a guess that he wanted to revive Orientalist learning. See, this is technically incorrect because the opposite happened to this. It is not related to education in any way or form. It's an ICS or college. This is a random statement they gave just to put you off. If you know that Fort William College is ICS, then the people who answered it incorrectly, what are you doing? Are you jumping the gun? Are you overthinking? Or are you thinking that I'm doing questions out of education? That is why they are education questions. If it's a silly mistake, then it's okay. But if understand this, these are very simple questions. It's a very simple question. Very simple question. Can I move on? There's nothing here. Okay. Next. Which one of the following statements correctly explains the impact of Industrial Revolution in India during the first half of 19th century? Indian handicrafts were ruined. Machines were introduced in Indian textile industry in large numbers. Railway lines were laid in many parts of the country. Heavy duties were imposed on imports of British manufacturing. Now here again, I don't expect you to overthink at least. Again, a very easy one. I know what is going to happen. I know two options. Some of you are going to overthink. It's an epidemic, pandemic rather. Perfect. Good. Not spreading. No chronic. 62% A. The people who answered B, that is not even true. C, you are looking for positives. D again is not true. See, machines were introduced. Never they will introduce machines. Heavy duty imposed on British manufacturing. They will never do that. Railway lines were laid in large parts of India. It is saying correctly explain impact. This is nothing but deindustrialization. Machine is silk manufacturing. Perfect abhe. Diagnosis overthinking. But was that the impact or was it a facilitating move? Getting my point? Why is it A? It's asking you impact of the Industrial Revolution. Not asking you how did it facilitate industries in India. Again, a very easy question just based on understanding. Are they asking you famines? Are they asking you that? No. Are they asking you dates? No. They're just simply, very simply asking you statement based questions on impact. Okay. Now, this we will do tomorrow. I want to do this, yes. Economically, one of the reasons of the British rule in India in 19th century was the increase in export in economically. One of the results of British rule in India was increase in the export of Indian handicrafts, growth in number of Indian owned factories, commercialization of Indian agriculture, rapid increase in urban population. Come on. Perfect. 85%. Pat on the back. Very good. Result of British rule, increase in export, no. Growth, no. Increase, no. Commercialization. From which book you are teaching us? In the last 12 years, I've read 100 plus books. So all of it. Right? Okay. Last question for today. I want to see, are you following commercialization? The staple commodities of export by the English East India Company from Bengal. Now please pay attention. In the middle of 18th century were raw cotton, oilseeds, opium, sugar, salt, zinc, lead, copper, silver, gold, spices and tea, cotton, silk, saltpeter, opium. Now here they've tried to a little bit confuse you, but why not? Staple means standard. %74%. Have a chocolate. Very good. Great. If you're finding these questions easy, these are tricky questions. Great. Yes. Cotton, silk, saltpeter and opium. Why? Middle of 18th century means 1750. So this may be true after 1813. But this is the answer because it's talking to you. Above, look at the time period. That is the catch. 74% of you are on fire. Great. So this is a good question to check. Are you noticing the question itself? Are you noticing the question itself? So with this, I'll finish today. I'll show you the leaderboard once. So multiple students on 40 out of 44 questions we did. Chetan, Deepak, Amit, Akanksha, Munna, very silent people also. Don't say anything in class, but are performing well. Very good. Jay, Varshita, Shrikanda, Kirthana, Vaishnavi, Deepak, Sachin, Sayadri, Monalisa, Kirubagar. Very good. Perfect. Janvi. So you know who you are. You know who you are. The one which is in front of me has a certain amount of names, but you would know your rank. It will show that to you. Right? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I will see you tomorrow, same time. Keep it simple, and we will take this story forward and finish for this week on Friday. Yes, great. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye. The SME is there for the next half an hour to take your questions. The article links have been pushed already, and the SME, can you just push it again? Okay. Bye bye. I hope you found all of this interesting and something new you got to know. Bye bye.